The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the Bentley as Lila Mercer stepped out, her Louboutin heels clicking against the wet marble steps of Summit Haven. She didn't see the elderly gatekeeper struggling with the heavy iron gates in the storm, didn't see him stumble, didn't see the pain flash across his weathered face as he fought to keep them open for her. What she did see was an inconvenience, a nobody blocking her path to destiny. "Move it, old man," she snapped, shoving past him without a glance. The gatekeeper billionaire Alistair Quan, in disguise, watched his son's fiancée disappear into the mansion, and in that moment knew his worst fears were about to come true. This wasn't just about money or status. This was about the soul of his family, the future of his empire, and whether love could survive when respect had already died. Stay with me until the end of this story, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The first light of dawn crept across the Pacific horizon, like spilled gold casting long shadows through the wrought iron gates of Summit Haven. At 68, Alistair Quan had built an empire that spanned continents. But this morning, he stood hunched over in borrowed clothes, his hands trembling, not from age, but from the weight of what he was about to discover. The transformation had taken hours. Gone was the perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, replaced by a threadbare custodian's uniform. His silver hair, usually styled to perfection, hung limp and unkempt beneath a worn baseball cap. Latex makeup aged his face, another decade adding liver spots and deepening the lines around his eyes. When he looked in the mirror, even he didn't recognize the man staring back. "You sure about this, sir?" Maeve O'Donnell had asked the night before, her Irish accent thick with concern. The estate manager had been with the Quan family for 15 years, had watched Daniel grow from an awkward teenager into the earnest man he'd become. She'd also been there for every gold digger, every social climber, every woman who saw dollar signs instead of the gentle soul behind them. "I have to know Maeve," Alistair had replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I've failed him before. I won't fail him again." Now, as he fumbled with the massive iron gates, each one weighing nearly a ton, Alistair felt the crushing responsibility of his deception. The gates of Summit Haven weren't just an entrance. They were a symbol. For over a century, they'd welcomed those worthy of the Quan name and turned away those who weren't. Today, they would serve as the first test. The morning air was crisp, carrying the salt scent of the ocean below. Summit Haven, perched on the cliff like a crown jewel, its neo-Gothic architecture commanding respect from all who approached. Gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry, maintained by a staff of 20, who'd been told only that a new temporary gatekeeper would be working today, someone testing out for a permanent position. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, the low rumble of an engine announced the first arrival. Alistair's pulse quickened as he recognized the silver Tesla Model S Daniel's car. His son had always been punctual, responsible, everything a father could want. But was he wise? That remained to be seen. Daniel Quan stepped out of the driver's side, his 6-foot frame unfolding with natural grace. At 30, he'd inherited his father's sharp intellect and his mother's compassionate heart, a combination that made him beloved by everyone who knew him. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable, but there was something in his eyes that morning, a nervousness Alistair recognized all too well. The passenger door opened, and she emerged. Lila Mercer moved like liquid grace, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. At 28, she possessed the kind of beauty that stopped traffic, auburn hair that caught the light like fire-green eyes, that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing, and a figure that made designer clothes look like they'd been created specifically for her. She wore a cream-colored Chanel dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month, paired with the Louboutins that had become her signature. But it wasn't her beauty that made Alistair's breath catch. It was the way she looked at the world as if it existed solely for her convenience. "Good morning?" Daniel called out cheerfully as they approached the gates. He'd spotted the gatekeeper immediately, his natural kindness compelling him to acknowledge the man. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Alistair's heart swelled with pride and broke simultaneously. His son was exactly who he'd raised him to be, a man who saw people, not positions. "Indeed it is, sir," he replied, affecting a slight limp as he moved to unlock the gates. Though these old bones don't appreciate the morning chill quite like they used to. Daniel started forward, genuine concern creasing his features. "Are you all right? Do you need help with those?" It was the first test, and Daniel was passing with flying colors. But Lila, "Daniel, we're already 10 minutes behind schedule," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people used when addressing staff, not quite rude, but unmistakably dismissive. She didn't look at the gatekeeper, didn't acknowledge his struggle with the heavy gates. Her attention was fixed on her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be wedding vendors' Instagram accounts. "I'm sure 10 minutes won't," Daniel began. "Your father expects punctuality." Lila cut him off, still not looking up. "Especially today." Alistair's jaw tightened. She was right, of course he did expect punctuality, but not at the expense of basic human decency. He watched his son's face, saw the moment of hesitation, the internal struggle between his natural kindness and his desire to please his fiancée. The gates finally swung open with a rusty groan that echoed across the estate grounds. Alistair stepped back, removing his cap in a gesture of respect that had been ingrained in him since childhood, a habit from a different era when staff truly mattered to the families they served. "Thank you," Daniel said warmly, pressing a $20 bill into the gatekeeper's weathered hand. "Get yourself something warm to drink." Lila's head snapped up from her phone, her green eyes flashing with irritation. "Daniel, really? You can't tip every person you meet." "Why not?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying the first note of confusion Alistair had heard from him in months. "It's a kind gesture. It's encouraging dependence," Lila replied smoothly, slipping her phone into her Hermes bag and taking Daniel's arm. "Besides, I'm sure your father pays his staff quite well enough." Alistair wanted to speak, wanted to defend himself and his generous treatment of employees, but he bit his tongue. This was only the beginning. As the couple walked through the gates toward the mansion's front entrance, he caught Lila glancing back, not at him, but at the security camera mounted above the gate. Even now she was performing. The first car had barely disappeared around the curved driveway when a second vehicle approached, a battered Honda Civic with a rideshare sticker in the window. Tomas Rivas, 26, and supporting his mother and younger sister on a driver's income, pulled up to the gates with the careful precision of someone who couldn't afford a single mistake. "Delivery for the Quan estate," Tomas called out, his accent carrying traces of his El Salvador childhood. He held up a small package, probably last-minute wedding favors or some other detail Lila had deemed essential. "Of course, son," Alistair replied, moving to open the gates again. But as he did, a sharp crack echoed across the morning air. One of the massive hinges, weakened by age and the morning's dampness, finally gave way. The left gate swayed dangerously, and Alistair had to throw his full weight against it to keep it from crashing down. Tomas immediately jumped from his car, rushing to help support the gate. "Whoa, careful there. Let me help." Together they managed to stabilize the gate, but not before Alistair had to duck under the swinging iron, scraping his cheek against the rough metal. Blood trickled down his weathered face, and he could feel his disguise makeup smearing. "You're hurt," Tomas said, genuine concern in his voice. "Should I call someone? Get you to a doctor?" "It's nothing." Alistair waved off the concern, though his heart was touched by the young man's immediate compassion. "Just a scratch. But thank you for your help. I couldn't have managed alone. Tomas looked skeptical, but nodded. Maybe we should report this to maintenance. That gate could really hurt someone. I'll take care of it, Alistair promised, filing away another mental note about the kind of person his son should be surrounding himself with. You'd better make your delivery before you're late. As Tomas drove through the gates, Alistair caught sight of movement in the mansion's upper windows. Someone had been watching, but who? The answer came sooner than expected. Maeve O'Donnell appeared at the gates within minutes, her silver hair pulled back in its characteristic bun, her expression unreadable. She'd changed from her usual estate manager attire into jeans and a work shirt, clearly intending to blend in with the maintenance staff. Heard there was some trouble with the gates, she said, her Irish accent softer than usual. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a ground supervisor, checking on a minor incident. But her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, took in every detail of Alistair's appearance. Nothing I can't handle, he replied, dabbing at the cut on his cheek with a handkerchief. Maeve stepped closer, pretending to examine the damaged hinge, while actually checking his disguise. That's going to need attention, she said, and Alistair wasn't sure if she meant the gate or his bleeding face. Can't have people getting hurt on the property. No, he agreed quietly. We can't. A charged moment passed between them, 15 years of shared understanding, of watching the Quan family navigate triumphs and tragedies, of protecting Daniel from a world that often saw him as a prize rather than a person. The young lady who came through earlier, Maeve said carefully, still examining the gate. She seemed focused. That's one word for it, Alistair muttered. She didn't notice you were hurt after helping with the gate. She didn't notice me at all. Maeve's hands stilled on the iron hinges. That tells us something, doesn't it? Before Alistair could respond, another car approached a florist's van, delivering the fresh arrangements for the day's meetings. The elderly driver, Mrs. Chen, had been providing flowers for the Quan family for over a decade. She knew every staff member by name, remembered their birthdays, and always brought extra pastries for the security team. "Good morning, dear," she called out cheerfully as she spotted the gatekeeper. "Oh my, what happened to your face?" "Small accident with the gate," Alistair explained, touched by her immediate concern. "Nothing serious." Mrs. Chen clucked her tongue sympathetically. "You need to clean that properly. Tetanus is nothing to joke about at our age." She rummaged in her van and produced a small first aid kit. "Here, let me help." For the next 5 minutes, the 70-year-old florist fussed over Alistair's cut with the tenderness of a mother, cleaning it carefully and applying a small bandage. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Much better. Now you take care of yourself, you hear? This family depends on all of us." As Mrs. Chen drove through the gates toward the mansion's service entrance, Maeve shook her head in wonder. 70 years old, and she stopped to help a stranger. Meanwhile, my son's fiancée couldn't be bothered to notice I existed, Alistair finished grimly. "Early days yet," Maeve cautioned, though her tone suggested she'd already reached her own conclusions. "People can surprise you." But even as she said it, both of them knew that first impressions, especially in moments of crisis, revealed character in ways that years of polite conversation never could. The morning continued with a steady stream of deliveries and arrivals. Each interaction became a small test, a tiny window into the souls of those who passed through the gates. The UPS driver who offered to help carry packages when he saw Alistair favoring his injured side. The groundskeeper who brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. The security team member who quietly called maintenance about the damaged gate. And then at precisely 9:45 a.m., the silver Tesla returned. This time Lila was driving, and she was alone. Daniel must have gone into the house for his morning meeting with the estate lawyers, part of the wedding preparations that seemed to grow more complex by the day. This would be Alistair's first real test, with her one-on-one without his son's moderating presence. She pulled up to the gates with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened for her. But instead of waiting for the gatekeeper to act, she leaned on the horn, 3 sharp, demanding blasts that echoed across the peaceful morning air. Alistair limped over his injured leg, genuine now from the morning's exertions. "Good morning, miss. How can I help you?" "The gates," Lila said, without looking at him, her voice sharp with impatience. "Open them. I'm late for my dress fitting." "Of course." Alistair began the laborious process of opening the heavy gates made more difficult by the damaged hinge. Each movement sent a spike of pain through his back, but he persevered, aware that he was being watched, but not with concern. Through the Tesla's tinted windows, he could see Lila checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, completely oblivious to his struggle. When he finally got the gates open, breathing heavily from the exertion, she gunned the engine without so much as a nod of acknowledgement. The Tesla shot forward and stopped abruptly as the left gate, weakened by the morning's damage, swung shut again, blocking her path. "Are you kidding me?" Lila's voice carried clearly through her open window. She honked again, longer this time, the sound harsh and demanding in the morning air. Alistair hurried to the gate as quickly as his disguised limp would allow, but it wasn't fast enough for Lila. She threw the car into park and stepped out, her heels clicking angrily against the cobblestones. "This is completely unacceptable," she snapped, advancing on him like a predator. "Do you have any idea who I am? What my time is worth?" "I apologize, miss," Alistair replied, his voice carefully subservient. "The gate mechanism is—" "I don't care about your excuses," Lila cut him off. "I care about solutions. Fix it, now." She stood there, arms crossed, watching with undisguised impatience as Alistair wrestled with the damaged gate. Her designer dress and perfect makeup seemed almost obscene in contrast to his shabby uniform and bandaged face. When he finally managed to prop the gate open with a nearby rock, she was already walking back to her car. "This better not happen again," she called over her shoulder. "I'll be back in 2 hours, and I expect this to be properly fixed by then. I shouldn't have to deal with incompetent staff on my wedding week." She drove through the gates, without another word, leaving Alistair standing alone in a cloud of exhaust fumes and wounded dignity. But it was what happened next that truly broke his heart. From his position at the gates, Alistair had a clear view of the mansion's front entrance. He watched as Lila parked and walked up the marble steps, her posture transforming from impatient irritation to graceful elegance in the span of seconds. By the time Daniel appeared in the doorway, having heard her car arrive, she was all smiles and affectionate touches. "Darling," she cooed, reaching up to straighten his tie. "How did the meeting go?" "Boring legal stuff," Daniel replied, pulling her close for a kiss. "How was your morning? You seem stressed." "Oh, just the usual wedding chaos." Lila laughed, the sound musical and light. "You know how it is. Everyone wants everything to be perfect for us." Alistair watched his son's face soften with love and concern, saw him stroke Lila's hair with gentle fingers. Daniel had no idea what had just transpired at the gates, no clue about the woman he was planning to marry. And why would he? In his presence, Lila was everything he believed her to be. Beautiful, sophisticated, loving. It was a masterful performance, and it terrified Alistair more than any hostile takeover or business crisis ever had. This wasn't just about money or social climbing. This was about deception at the deepest level, the kind that destroyed lives and families. "Sir," Maeve's voice startled him from his dark thoughts. She'd approached from the gardens, pruning shears in hand, playing her role as ground supervisor. Everything all right? No, Alistair said quietly, his voice heavy with a father's heartbreak. Everything is most definitely not all right. Maeve glanced toward the mansion, where Daniel and Lila had disappeared inside. What do you want to do? Alistair looked at the damaged gate, then at the bandage on his hand, from where he'd scraped it on the iron, then at the mansion where his son was planning a future with a woman who saw people like him as furniture to be moved out of the way. The pain in his chest had nothing to do with his morning's physical exertions. We continue, he said finally, but carefully, very carefully. As the morning stretched toward noon, Alistair found himself thinking about his own father, who'd built the Quan fortune from nothing but determination and the unwavering belief that how you treated people, especially those who couldn't help you, defined who you really were. The old man had never lived to see Summit Haven completed, never walked through these gates as anything but a construction supervisor checking on progress. Power doesn't corrupt, his father had once told him. It reveals. When you have everything, what you choose to do with it shows the world who you've always been inside. Now watching the sun climb higher over the Pacific, Alistair wondered what power had revealed about Lila Mercer, and more frighteningly, what it might reveal about himself before this test was over. The truth was coming whether he was ready or not, and deep in his father's heart he suspected that when it arrived it would tear his family apart before it could ever make them whole. But some truths he knew were worth the breaking, because without them there could be no real foundation for love, only the illusion of it built on sand and destined to crumble at the first real storm. As the gates of Summit Haven stood sentinel against the morning light, damaged but still standing, Alistair Quan prepared for the most important test of his life, not of his wealth or power or business acumen, but of his ability to save his son from a mistake that would haunt them all forever. The morning was ending, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The damaged gate groaned ominously in the afternoon breeze as Alistair adjusted his position behind the small security booth. 2 hours had passed since Lila's harsh words and maintenance had arrived to examine the broken hinge, a legitimate repair crew who had no idea they were working under the watchful eye of their actual employer. Gonna take most of the day to fix this properly, the lead mechanic told Alistair, wiping grease from his hands. These old gates weren't built for the kind of use they get now. We'll need to reinforce the whole frame. Do what you need to do, Alistair replied, grateful for the excuse to keep his post. The longer he stayed at the gates, the more he would see of Lila's true nature. At exactly noon, a familiar figure approached on foot from the mansion's service entrance. Maria Santos, the head housekeeper, had worked for the Quan family for 8 years. Her 3 children all had college funds thanks to Alistair's education initiative for staff families, though she didn't know he was the one watching her approach. "Excuse me," Maria called out in her soft accent, carrying a thermal bag. "Mrs. O'Donnell said you might be hungry. The kitchen made extra sandwiches." Alistair's throat tightened with emotion. Even in disguise, even as a supposed stranger, the Quan family staff were taking care of him. "That's very kind of you. Thank you." Maria smiled, setting down a turkey sandwich, homemade cookies, and a thermos of coffee. "Mrs. O'Donnell also said to tell you that the young Miss Mercer will be returning soon. She wanted you to be prepared." The warning was subtle but clear. Maeve had witnessed the morning's interaction and was looking out for him. "I appreciate that. She can be—" Maria paused, choosing her words carefully. "Very particular about things being perfect, especially this week." "Has she been difficult?" Alistair asked, his curiosity overriding caution. Maria's expression became diplomatically neutral. "She has high standards. We all want the young master to be happy." It was a masterclass in discretion, but Alistair heard what wasn't being said. The staff had noticed Lila's behavior, But their loyalty to Daniel prevented them from speaking openly against his choice. The weight of their position, needing their jobs, wanting to protect Daniel, but seeing the truth of who Lila really was, settled heavily on Alistair's conscience. "The young master is a good man," he said carefully. "The best." Maria agreed immediately, her voice warm with genuine affection. "He remembers everyone's names, asks about our families. Last month, when my youngest had appendicitis, he personally drove us to the hospital and sat with us until the surgery was over. That's not something you forget." Alistair's heart swelled with paternal pride, even as it broke for what his son was about to endure. Daniel's kindness was real, but it was also his greatest vulnerability. It made him see goodness in people even when it wasn't there. The rumble of an approaching engine interrupted his thoughts. Lila's Tesla appeared around the bend, returning from her dress fitting with the aggressive precision that was becoming her signature. Maria quickly gathered the empty thermal bag, her demeanor shifting to professional efficiency. "I should get back to the house," she said quietly. "Good luck." Lila pulled up to the gates and immediately began honking, despite the obvious presence of the maintenance crew working on the damaged hinge. The workers looked up in surprise, then irritation, as the sharp blasts echoed across the peaceful estate grounds. "Hey!" one of them called out. "We're trying to work here." Lila rolled down her window, her green eyes flashing with annoyance. "We'll work faster. I need to get through." "Ma'am, we've got the gate propped open on the right side," the lead mechanic explained patiently. "Just drive around the equipment." "I shouldn't have to navigate around your mess," Lila snapped. "This is completely unprofessional. Don't you people coordinate these things?" Alistair stepped forward, his hands raised peacefully. "Miss Mercer, I can guide you through." "Don't." Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Just don't. I've had enough incompetence for one day." She threw the car into reverse, with enough force to screech the tires backed up 20 feet, then gunned it forward, threading between the maintenance equipment with inches to spare. The workers had to jump aside to avoid being hit, and one of their toolboxes was knocked over, spilling wrenches and screws across the cobblestones. "Jesus Christ!" the mechanic shouted after her. "What's wrong with that woman?" Alistair knelt to help gather the scattered tools, his mind reeling. This wasn't just rudeness or stress. This was a pattern of behavior that spoke to something much deeper and more troubling. The way Lila treated people she considered beneath her revealed a fundamental lack of empathy that no amount of wedding planning pressure could excuse. "Some people," the mechanic muttered, accepting his tools back from Alistair, "think money gives them the right to treat everyone else like garbage." "Unfortunately," Alistair replied quietly, "you're not wrong." 20 minutes later, Daniel appeared at the gates, jogging down the driveway in casual clothes. His face was flushed with exercise and concern, and he was breathing hard from the run. "Is everyone okay?" he asked immediately, looking between Alistair and the maintenance crew. "Lila said there was some kind of incident with the repair work." The lead mechanic exchanged a glance with his team, clearly debating how much to say. Finally, he shrugged. "Just a little misunderstanding about the work area. Nothing serious." Daniel's brow furrowed. "She seemed pretty upset. Said someone was rude to her." Alistair felt his stomach clench. Lila had not only shown her true colors, but was now rewriting history to make herself the victim. It was a manipulation tactic as old as time, and Daniel, trusting, loving Daniel, was falling for it completely. "I'm sorry if there was any confusion." Daniel continued, pulling out his wallet. "Let me cover lunch for everyone. It's the least I can do." "That's not necessary, sir," the mechanic protested, but Daniel was already pressing cash into his hands. "Please, I insist. And again, I apologize for any trouble." As Daniel jogged back toward the mansion, the mechanic shook his head in amazement. "Now that's a class act right there. Complete opposite of his." He caught himself before finishing the sentence. Yes, Alistair agreed heavily. He is. The afternoon brought a steady stream of wedding vendors, florists, caterers, musicians, photographers, all arriving to finalize details for the ceremony that was now just days away. Each interaction became another small test, another window into Lila's character. The wedding photographer, a talented young woman named Sophie Chen, arrived with equipment cases and an assistant. As they approached the gates, Sophie's assistant tripped on the uneven cobblestones, sending camera equipment spilling across the ground. "Oh no!" Sophie cried out, rushing to help her colleague. Together they frantically checked each piece of expensive equipment for damage. Alistair immediately moved to assist them, his genuine concern overriding his disguised role. "Anyone hurt?" "Just my pride," the assistant groaned, picking up a scattered lens cap. "And possibly a very expensive telephoto lens." They spent several minutes carefully inspecting the equipment with Alistair helping to reorganize their cases. Sophie was effusive in her gratitude, but their relief was short-lived. Lila's Tesla appeared just as they were finishing up, and she witnessed the tail end of the equipment gathering. "What's all this mess?" Lila demanded, stepping out of her car with obvious displeasure. "This is supposed to be a professional operation." "Just a small accident," Sophie explained quickly. "Everything's fine now. We were just—" "I don't care about your excuses," Lila interrupted. "I care about results. Can you do the job or not?" Sophie's face flushed red, but she maintained her professional composure. "Absolutely. All of our equipment is fully functional." "It better be. This wedding is going to be featured in Vanity Fair, and I won't have it ruined by amateur hour mistakes." Alistair watched Sophie's assistant bite her lip to keep from responding. These were talented professionals who had been hired based on their stellar reputation, not charity cases in need of Lila's condescension. But they needed the high-profile job, and Lila knew it. "Perhaps," Alistair interjected carefully, "I could help carry their equipment to the house. Save everyone some time." Lila's gaze fixed on him with laser intensity. "You again. Don't you have gates to watch or something?" "The maintenance crew is handling the repairs," he replied evenly. "I just thought—" "Don't think. That's not what you're paid for." The words hung in the air like a slap. Sophie and her assistant exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly appalled by Lila's treatment of the elderly gatekeeper. But Alistair absorbed the insult with the practiced dignity of someone who had learned long ago that true character was revealed not in how you treated those above you, but those below. "Of course, miss. My apologies." As the group moved toward the mansion, Alistair caught Sophie's eye. She mouthed a silent sorry before following Lila up the driveway. Another small kindness from a stranger. Another reminder that most people, when given the choice, chose compassion over cruelty. But Lila wasn't most people. The real revelation came 2 hours later when Alistair witnessed something that made his blood run cold. He was adjusting the temporary barrier around the gate repair when he heard voices approaching from the mansion's side garden. Peeking around the corner of the security booth, he saw Lila talking on her phone while walking alone through the formal gardens. "Mother, I don't care how much it costs," Lila was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "We need that bridge loan approved before the wedding. The auditors are getting closer, and if they freeze Dad's accounts before I'm legally married—" Alistair felt ice form in his veins. He pressed himself closer to the booth, straining to hear every word. "No, Daniel doesn't suspect anything. He's too trusting for his own good." Lila laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "I've got him convinced that I love him for who he is, not what he has. Men are so predictable that way." A pause as the person on the other end spoke. "The prenup, please. I've been working on that angle for months." Poor Daniel is so concerned about protecting our love from outside influences that he's actually considering waiving it entirely. Can you imagine? All that money, and he's ready to hand it over because he thinks it'll prove how much he trusts me. Another pause, longer this time. Of course I can play the loving wife for a few years. It's not like it's hard work. Daniel's sweet enough, and he'll be too busy running the company to notice if I'm not entirely faithful. Besides, once I have access to the trust funds, I can start planning my exit strategy. Alistair gripped the wooden booth so hard his knuckles went white. This wasn't just gold digging. This was a calculated con game designed to destroy his son financially and emotionally. Lila wasn't just planning to marry Daniel for his money. She was planning to systematically loot the family fortune and then disappear, leaving him broken and betrayed. The old man's health isn't great anyway. Lila continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Daniel will inherit everything sooner rather than later, and when he does, I'll be right there to help him manage it. The implications hit Alistair like a physical blow. She was counting on his death, planning for it, seeing it as another step in her financial strategy. He thought of his recent heart episode, the one that had prompted him to accelerate Daniel's transition into company leadership, and realized that somehow Lila had learned about his health concerns. I have to go, Lila said suddenly. Daniel's coming down for afternoon tea, and I need to be the perfect fiancée. Call me tonight with an update on the loan. She ended the call and immediately transformed her predatory expression, melting into one of gentle affection, as Daniel appeared from the mansion's French doors. The speed and completeness of the transformation was terrifying, like watching a master actress slip into character. Darling, she called out, rushing to meet him with arms outstretched. I was just admiring your mother's rose garden. It's going to be perfect for the ceremony photos. I'm so glad you like it, Daniel replied, pulling her close for a kiss. I was thinking we could plant some new varieties next spring. Maybe start our own garden tradition. That sounds wonderful. Lila sighed contentedly against his chest. I love how you think about our future together. Alistair had to grip the booth tighter to keep from being sick. The woman his son loved, the woman he was planning to build a life with, was already planning his destruction. And Daniel, trusting optimistic Daniel, had no idea he was walking into a trap that would cost him everything. As the couple strolled back toward the mansion, Alistair's mind raced through possibilities. He could confront Daniel directly, but without proof, it would sound like the paranoid ravings of an overprotective father. He could hire investigators, but that would take time. They didn't have. The wedding was in 4 days. Or he could continue this charade, gathering evidence and hoping to expose Lila's true nature in a way that Daniel couldn't deny or rationalize away. The sound of footsteps on gravel interrupted his dark thoughts. Maeve O'Donnell was approaching from the gardens, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with concern. Maintenance says they'll have the gate fixed within the hour, she reported, settling beside him at the booth. How are you holding up? I heard her, Maeve, Alistair said quietly, his voice hollow with shock. On the phone with her mother. It's worse than we thought. Maeve's expression didn't change, but her hands clenched into fists. How much worse? Alistair told her everything. The bridge loan, the manipulation of the prenup, the calculated exit strategy, the casual discussion of his own mortality as a business opportunity. With each revelation, Maeve's face grew paler, her Irish accent thickening with suppressed emotion. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, she whispered when he finished. That poor boy has no idea what's coming for him. None at all. And the worst part is, she's so good at this that even if we told him, he'd probably defend her. She's got him completely convinced that she loves him. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the estate grounds. In the distance, they could see Daniel and Lila on the mansion's terrace, sharing tea, and what appeared to be an intimate conversation. From their body language, anyone would have assumed they were looking at a couple deeply in love. "What do we do?" Maeve asked finally. "We get proof." Alistair replied, his voice hardening with resolve. "Something so undeniable that even Daniel can't explain it away. But we have to be careful. If Lila suspects we're onto her, she might accelerate her timeline or disappear altogether. And then Daniel would spend the rest of his life wondering what went wrong, blaming himself." "That might be worse than losing the money," Maeve agreed. "At least if we expose her, he'll know the truth. He'll be hurt, but he'll heal. If she just vanishes after taking everything, that could destroy him permanently." A new voice interrupted their conversation, young, nervous, and definitely not supposed to be there. "Excuse me?" Thomas Rivas approached hesitantly. His delivery uniform wrinkled from a long day of driving. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to someone about what happened this morning." Alistair and Maeve exchanged glances. "What about this morning?" Maeve asked carefully. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly wrestling with some internal conflict. "Look, I know this might sound crazy, but I've been thinking about what I saw, and I can't just ignore it anymore. That woman, Miss Mercer, the way she treated you this morning, sir, it wasn't right." "These things happen," Alistair replied diplomatically. "Some people are having bad days." "No, this wasn't a bad day," Thomas insisted, his voice gaining strength. "I've been driving for 3 years, and I've seen every kind of person there is. Rich, poor, whatever. Most people, when they see someone hurt and struggling, they at least acknowledge it. She didn't just ignore you. She treated you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "The thing is, I have a dash cam. It records everything. And when I got home last night, I was checking the footage to make sure I hadn't missed any traffic violations, and I saw something that made me sick to my stomach." Alistair's pulse quickened. "What did you see?" "She deliberately splashed you with that coffee she was carrying. It wasn't an accident. She saw you standing there hurt and bleeding, and she flicked that cup at you like you were some kind of animal. The look on her face." Thomas shuddered. "I've never seen anything like it. Pure contempt." The memory came flooding back, the cold coffee hitting his face, the casual cruelty of it, the way Lila had walked away without a backward glance. He'd been so focused on the shock of her behavior that he hadn't realized it had been captured on video. "Why are you telling us this?" Maeve asked, though Alistair could see she was already calculating the implications. "Because that man she's marrying seems like a good guy," Thomas replied simply. "And if she treats a stranger like that, how do you think she's going to treat him when the cameras aren't rolling, when she doesn't have to pretend anymore?" It was the question that cut to the heart of everything. Alistair looked at this young man, barely older than Daniel, working multiple jobs to support his family, who had risked his livelihood to speak up for a stranger, and felt something shift inside his chest. "This footage," he said carefully, "would you be willing to share it?" "That's why I'm here." Thomas nodded. "I made a copy on my phone. I figure if someone needs to see what she's really like, they should have the chance." As Thomas pulled out his phone and began scrolling through the footage, Alistair felt the first stirring of hope he'd had all day. The truth was finally revealing itself piece by piece through the courage of people who barely knew Daniel, but cared enough about basic human decency to speak up. The video was damning. Shot from the perfect angle to capture both Lila's face and her deliberate actions, it showed exactly what Thomas had described. A moment of calculated cruelty that revealed her character more clearly than any amount of testimony ever could. "My God," Maeve breathed, watching the footage over Alistair's shoulder. She enjoyed it. Look at her expression. She actually enjoyed hurting him. It was true. In the few seconds after splashing the coffee before she turned away, Lila's face showed something that made Alistair's skin crawl: satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone who had just inflicted pain on a helpless target and found pleasure in the act. "Can you send this to me?" Maeve asked, her voice steady despite the emotion Alistair could see building behind her eyes. "Already done," Tomas replied, showing them the message confirmation. "I sent it to the main estate email address too, just in case." "Thank you," Alistair said, and meant it more than the young man could possibly know. "You've done the right thing." "I hope so," Tomas replied, looking toward the mansion where Daniel and Lila were still visible on the terrace. "That guy doesn't deserve what's coming to him if nobody speaks up." As Tomas drove away, Alistair and Maeve sat in charged silence, both understanding that everything had just changed. They now had proof, undeniable recorded proof, of Lila's true nature. But they also had a responsibility to use it wisely, in a way that would save Daniel without destroying him. "The question now," Maeve said slowly, "is timing." "And context," Alistair agreed. "This video is powerful, but if we just show it to Daniel in isolation, Lila might be able to explain it away. Stress, bad lighting, misunderstanding. She's smart enough to come up with something. We need more. We need everything. Her phone call, the video witnesses to her behavior patterns. We need to build a case so comprehensive that there's no room for doubt or manipulation." As if summoned by their conversation, Daniel appeared at the mansion's front entrance, walking quickly toward the gates. His expression was troubled, and he seemed to be heading directly for them. "Something's happened," Maeve murmured, straightening her posture. Daniel reached them slightly out of breath, his usual composure cracked with worry. "Have either of you seen anything unusual today? Any strangers hanging around people who shouldn't be here?" Alistair's blood chilled. What kind of strangers? Lila thinks someone might have been listening to her phone conversations. She was in the garden earlier, and she had the feeling she was being watched. Given all the wedding preparations and media attention, we can't be too careful about privacy. The irony was staggering. Lila's paranoid instincts had actually been correct. Someone had been listening to her phone conversation. But her fear of exposure was now putting Alistair's entire plan at risk. "I haven't seen anyone suspicious," Maeve replied smoothly. "But I'll have security do an extra sweep of the grounds." "Thanks, I'd appreciate that." Daniel's gaze moved to Alistair, and for a moment their eyes met directly. "And thank you for everything you're doing to keep the estate secure. I know this week has been chaotic." "Just doing my job, sir," Alistair replied, his heart breaking at the trust and gratitude in his son's voice. "Well, you're doing it well." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out another $20 bill. "Get yourself something nice for dinner. You've earned it." As Daniel walked back toward the mansion, Alistair stared at the money in his hand, the second tip his son had given him that day. It represented everything beautiful about Daniel's character and everything tragic about his situation. He was so genuinely kind, so naturally generous, that he couldn't see the predator circling him. "She's getting suspicious," Maeve observed quietly. "Which means we're running out of time," Alistair replied. "Whatever we're going to do, it has to happen soon. Tomorrow's the rehearsal dinner. Too public, too many witnesses who don't know the full story. The day after that is the wedding. Too late." They looked at each other, both understanding what that meant. Tonight. Whatever they were going to do to save Daniel, it had to happen tonight. Because after that, Lila Mercer would become Lila Quan, and everything would change forever. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the estate grounds, Alistair felt the weight of the next few hours settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Somewhere in that mansion, his son was planning a future with a woman who intended to destroy him. And the only person who could stop it was a father in disguise, armed with nothing but a cell phone video, and the desperate hope that love could survive the truth. The damaged gate stood as a perfect metaphor for the Quan family itself, still functional, but weak and vulnerable to collapse if the right pressure was applied in the right place at the right time. Tonight, Alistair would discover whether he was strong enough to repair what was broken, or whether some damage was simply too deep to fix. The evening mist rolled in from the Pacific as Alistair made his final rounds of the estate perimeter, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he checked each security station. The weight of what he'd discovered pressed against his chest like a physical force, making each breath a conscious effort. In 6 hours, the sun would rise on Daniel's rehearsal dinner, and in 36 hours, his son would walk down the aisle toward his own destruction. The main house glowed with warm light, its windows revealing glimpses of the life happening inside a life built on lies, so intricate they'd taken months to weave. Through the dining room's French doors, Alistair could see Daniel and Lila sharing what appeared to be an intimate dinner, her hand resting on his arm as she leaned in to whisper something that made him laugh. The sound of his son's genuine joy carried across the evening air like a knife to the heart. "Sir." Maeve's voice startled him from his surveillance. She approached from the staff quarters, her usual estate manager attire replaced by dark clothing that would blend into the shadows. "The security footage from today has been compiled. All of it." She handed him a tablet containing hours of recordings from the estate's extensive camera system. Every interaction, every moment of cruelty, every glimpse behind Lila's carefully constructed mask had been captured in high definition. "How bad is it?" Alistair asked, though he already knew the answer. "Worse than we thought. She doesn't just treat staff poorly, she enjoys it. Watch this." Maeve pulled up footage from the afternoon, showing Lila deliberately stepping on a housekeeper's foot while passing in the hallway, then turning back with a smile that never reached her eyes to offer a fake apology. The housekeeper, Maria Santos, mother of 3, accepted the apology with gracious professionalism, while clearly struggling not to limp. "And this?" Maeve continued advancing to another clip. Lila speaking to the florist, her voice sweet as honey, while her hand gestured dismissively at arrangements that had taken hours to perfect. "Those centerpieces are completely wrong. I specifically said understated elegance, not funeral parlor basic. Fix it, or find someone who can." The florist's face crumpled slightly before she managed a professional nod. "Of course, Miss Mercer. We'll make the adjustments. Tonight. I want them perfect for tomorrow's rehearsal." After Lila left, the footage showed the florist breaking down in quiet tears, her assistant rushing to comfort her. They would work through the night to meet an impossible standard, not because the arrangements were inadequate, but because Lila needed to assert her dominance. "Jesus," Alistair whispered, his heart breaking for these good people who were suffering for his son's blindness. How many more? Dozens. The chef, the groundskeepers, the security team. She systematically humiliated nearly every person who works here. But here's the thing that should terrify you most. Maeve switched to a different camera angle, this one showing Daniel entering the dining room, where Lila was berating a server for using the wrong water glasses. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. Lila's harsh expression melted into loving concern as she rushed to Daniel's side. "Darling, you look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "Just wedding stress," Daniel replied, accepting her embrace. "Nothing that won't be solved in a few days, when we can finally relax as husband and wife." "I can't wait." Lila sighed against his chest, her voice thick with fabricated emotion. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a dream. You're too good to be true." The irony was devastating. Lila was right. Daniel was too good to be true, at least for someone like her. But she wasn't living in a dream. She was orchestrating a nightmare that would destroy the best man either of them had ever known. "There's more," Maeve said grimly, pulling up audio recordings from the house's internal security system. "She's been making calls all day. We caught most of them. The first recording made Alistair's blood run cold. Lila speaking to someone identified in the system as legal counsel, clearly not the family lawyers Daniel knew about. The trust fund documentation needs to be filed within 48 hours of the ceremony. Lila was saying, her voice crisp with business-like efficiency. I'll have signing authority by Sunday evening, and I want the first transfer initiated Monday morning. That's very aggressive timing, came the response. Are you certain the husband won't question such immediate access? Lila's laugh was sharp and calculating. Daniel thinks prenups are unromantic. He's already agreed to full financial transparency and shared accounts. The man is handing me the keys to the kingdom because he thinks it proves his love. And the exit strategy. 18 months, maybe 2 years. Long enough to avoid obvious suspicion, short enough to get out before he realizes what's happening. By then, the offshore accounts will be established, and I'll be somewhere without extradition treaties. Alistair had to grip the tablet to keep from dropping it. This wasn't just theft. It was a multi-year plan to systematically loot everything his family had built over generations. The Quan Foundation, the scholarship funds, the employee benefits programs, the charitable trusts, everything would be stripped away to feed Lila's greed. There's one more recording, Maeve said quietly. This one from about an hour ago. The final audio clip was the most damning yet. Lila speaking to her mother, her voice filled with the kind of casual cruelty that revealed her true nature. Mother, stop worrying about the staff. They're irrelevant. Once I have control of the finances, I'll clean house anyway. Most of these people have been here too long. They're too comfortable, too expensive. I'll replace them with younger, cheaper help who understand their place. What about the son's attachment to them? Daniel's sentimental about everything. But men are easy to manipulate when you know which buttons to push. A few tears about modernizing operations and building our own traditions, and he'll support whatever I decide. He's so desperate to make me happy that he'd probably fire his own father if I asked sweetly enough. The casual mention of firing his own father hit Alistair like a physical blow. Lila had no idea how literally accurate that statement was, but the callousness behind it revealed everything about her character. We have to stop this, Maeve said, her Irish accent thick with suppressed fury. We have to save him. The question is how, Alistair replied, his mind racing through possibilities. If we just show him this evidence, she'll claim it's taken out of context, that she's been under stress, that we're lying. She's spent months building his trust, and our credibility with him is... He trailed off, realizing the painful truth. As a disguised gatekeeper, he had no credibility with Daniel at all. And as Daniel's father, his credibility was compromised by the very fact that parents often saw threats where none existed. Lila had positioned herself perfectly. Any accusation against her would seem like jealousy or overprotection. What we need, Maeve said slowly, is for her to reveal herself, publicly, in a way that Daniel can't deny or rationalize. A trap. A test. One final test that forces her to show her true colors when the stakes are highest. They stood in contemplative silence, watching the lights of the mansion twinkle in the distance. Somewhere inside, Daniel was falling deeper in love with a woman who planned to destroy him. And somewhere else, that same woman was probably making more calls to lawyers and bankers, fine-tuning the details of her carefully orchestrated betrayal. The rehearsal dinner, Alistair said suddenly, the idea crystallizing in his mind. Tomorrow night. Everyone will be there. Family, friends, wedding party. If we can engineer a situation where Lila's forced to react authentically. What kind of situation? Before Alistair could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Through the evening mist, a figure was walking toward them from the direction of the staff quarters. As it drew closer, they recognized Tomas Rivas, still in his delivery uniform, but looking haggard and determined. I'm sorry to bother you again, Tomas said, his voice tight with nervous energy. But there's something else I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned earlier. Alistair's pulse quickened. What is it? After I made my delivery this morning, I was putting away my equipment when I heard that woman, Miss Mercer, talking on her phone in the garden. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the way she was talking. Tomas shook his head. It didn't sound like someone planning a wedding. It sounded like someone planning a robbery. What exactly did you hear? Maeve asked, though Alistair suspected they already knew. She was talking about accessing trust funds, about exit strategies, about replacing staff with cheaper help. And she said something about the old man's health that made my skin crawl. Thomas looked directly at Alistair. I think she's planning to hurt people. Maybe not physically, but financially, emotionally. And I can't just drive away and pretend I didn't hear it. The moral courage of this young man, barely older than Daniel, with everything to lose and nothing to gain, struck Alistair profoundly. Thomas could have simply done his job and left, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to stay silent while a good man walked into a trap. What do you want to do about it? Alistair asked carefully. I want to help stop her, Tomas replied without hesitation. I don't know how, and I don't know what the consequences might be for me, but I can't live with myself if I just walk away. That guy in there, Daniel, he doesn't deserve what she's planning. Maeve stepped forward, her expression intense. If you're serious about helping, there might be something you can do, but it would require putting yourself at considerable risk. What kind of risk? The kind where you might lose your job, your reputation, maybe even face legal challenges if things go wrong, Alistair said honestly. But also the kind where you might save a good man's life from being destroyed. Tomas was quiet for a long moment, staring toward the mansion where warm light spilled from the windows. Finally, he nodded. Tell me what you need. As they began to plan, Alistair felt a flicker of hope for the first time since this nightmare had begun. They were no longer alone in their mission to save Daniel. They had allies, people who barely knew his son, but cared enough about basic human decency to risk themselves for a stranger. The plan that emerged was risky, complex, and entirely dependent on Lila reacting exactly as her character suggested she would. But it was also their only chance to expose her before she became legally entitled to destroy everything the Quan family had built. The rehearsal dinner is being held in the main ballroom, Maeve explained, pulling up the estate's floor plans on her tablet. 60 guests, including family wedding party and close friends. It's the perfect setting because Lila will be performing for the most important audience of her life. And that's when she'll be most dangerous, Alistair added. She'll be absolutely committed to maintaining her facade, which means she'll go to extreme lengths to suppress any threat to her image. That's where I come in, Tomas said, understanding his role immediately. I'll be the threat she can't ignore. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Tomas would arrive at the rehearsal dinner as a legitimate delivery driver, bringing last-minute items for the event. But instead of just dropping off his packages and leaving, he would request to speak with Daniel privately about something urgent he'd witnessed. She'll panic, Maeve predicted. She'll know exactly what he wants to discuss, and she'll do whatever it takes to prevent that conversation from happening. And that's when she'll reveal herself, Alistair concluded. In front of everyone who matters to Daniel, she'll show them who she really is. But even as they refined the details, Alistair felt a nagging worry about the ethics of what they were planning. They were essentially laying a trap for Lila, manipulating her into exposing herself. Was it justified by the magnitude of her planned betrayal? Or were they crossing a moral line that would make them as manipulative as she was? I know what you're thinking, Maeve said, reading his expression with the insight that came from 15 years of working together. You're wondering if we're any better than she is. The thought had occurred to me. There's a difference between manipulation for personal gain and manipulation to prevent harm. We're not trying to hurt her, we're trying to save him. And everyone else she's planning to destroy. Plus, Tomas added, all we're really doing is giving her a choice. We're not forcing her to act badly. We're just creating a situation where her true character will determine her response. If she's really the person she pretends to be, she'll handle the situation with grace and dignity. It was a fair point, but Alistair still felt the weight of what they were planning. They were betting Daniel's future happiness on their ability to predict and manipulate his fiancée's behavior. If they were wrong about her character, if she surprised them by reacting with unexpected wisdom or restraint, they might destroy an innocent woman's reputation and his son's chance at happiness. But as he looked at the tablet full of evidence, the audio recordings, the video footage, the pattern of systematic cruelty, Alistair knew they were past the point of giving Lila the benefit of the doubt. She had already revealed her true character dozens of times. Tomorrow night would simply force her to do it publicly. There's one more thing we need, Maeve said thoughtfully. Insurance. Something to ensure that even if our plan fails, Daniel will eventually learn the truth. What kind of insurance? A witness. Someone with unimpeachable credibility who can testify to what we've discovered. Alistair's mind immediately went to his longtime attorney James Whitfield, who had handled the Quan family's legal affairs for over 2 decades. But James was also officiating the wedding ceremony, which would make his testimony seem biased. What about Dr. Elizabeth Chen? Maeve suggested. She's been the family physician for years. She's known Daniel since he was a child, and she's not directly involved in the wedding. Dr. Chen was perfect, respected, trusted, and completely above suspicion. If they could convince her to witness Lila's behavior and potentially testify to Daniel about what she'd observed, it would add crucial credibility to their case. I'll reach out to her tonight, Alistair decided. Ask her to pay a surprise visit tomorrow evening. A final pre-wedding checkup to make sure Daniel's stress levels are manageable. She'll see right through that excuse, Maeve pointed out. No, she won't. Because I actually am worried about Daniel's stress levels. Look at him. He's been losing weight, having trouble sleeping, showing signs of anxiety. Any caring physician would want to check on him during such a major life transition. It was true. In all his planning and worry about Lila's deception, Alistair had almost overlooked the toll the wedding preparations were taking on his son. Daniel was pushing himself too hard, trying to be perfect for a woman who didn't deserve his effort. The irony was bitter. He was making himself sick, trying to please someone who was planning to abandon him anyway. As they finalized the details of their plan, a new sound drifted across the evening air piano music from the mansion's music room. Daniel was playing his fingers, finding the keys of the Steinway grand piano that had belonged to his grandmother. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a classical piece that spoke of love and hope and dreams of the future. He used to play for hours when he was upset, Alistair murmured, recognizing the signs of his son's emotional distress. Even as a child, music was how he processed difficult emotions. What's he upset about? Tomas asked. That was the question that terrified Alistair most. If Daniel was already sensing that something was wrong, if his subconscious was picking up on subtle cues that his conscious mind couldn't process, it meant the situation was even more precarious than they'd realized. Men in love often ignored red flags, but Daniel's intuition had always been keen. If it was sending him warning signals, we need to move faster, Alistair said urgently. If Daniel's starting to suspect something's wrong, Lila might accelerate her timeline. She could push for an immediate elopement claim. They need privacy from media attention, anything to get legal control before he can think too clearly. Or she might cut and run, Maeve added grimly. Disappear tonight with whatever she can grab and start over somewhere else with a new target. The possibility sent ice through Alistair's veins. If Lila vanished now, Daniel would spend the rest of his life wondering what he'd done wrong, blaming himself for driving away the woman he loved. He'd never know that he'd been the target of a predator, never understand that his pain was caused by her greed rather than his own inadequacy. "We do this tomorrow night," Alistair decided. "No delays, no second guessing. We force the truth into the light and let the consequences fall where they may." As if summoned by their conversation, lights began turning off in the mansion's upper floors. The household was settling in for the night, preparing for what they believed would be the final day before a joyous celebration. Only 3 people standing in the estate's gardens knew that tomorrow would actually be a day of reckoning that would either save the Quan family or destroy it forever. The piano music continued, Daniel's skilled fingers expressing emotions he probably couldn't even name. Love, anxiety, hope, fear, all woven together in a melody that seemed to capture the complexity of human hearts on the verge of irreversible decisions. "He's going to hate us," Alistair said quietly, the full weight of their plans settling on his shoulders. "Even if we're right, even if we save him, he's going to hate us for destroying his dreams." "Maybe," Maeve replied, "but he'll be alive to hate us. And eventually, when the pain fades and he meets someone who actually deserves him, he'll understand why we had to do this. And if we're wrong, if somehow we've misread everything and Lila really does love him, then we'll spend the rest of our lives making it up to both of them," Thomas said simply. "But we all know we're not wrong. The question isn't whether she's deceiving him, it's whether we're brave enough to expose the deception." The piano music stopped abruptly, leaving them in the kind of profound silence that made the evening feel suspended between moments. In the sudden quiet, they could hear the distant sound of the ocean waves against the cliffs below, the eternal rhythm that had witnessed countless human dramas play out on these grounds. Tomorrow the waves would still be there, indifferent to whatever pain or joy the humans above might experience. But for the Quan family, everything would change. The question was whether that change would be salvation or devastation. "I should go," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "I need to prepare for tomorrow, and you two probably have a dozen more details to work out." "Thomas," Alistair called as the young man turned to leave. "Thank you for everything. You're risking a lot for people you barely know. My grandmother used to say that character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when you think nobody will ever know," Thomas replied. "Tomorrow night we'll all find out what our characters really are." As Thomas disappeared into the mist, Alistair and Maeve stood alone with their plans and their fears. In 18 hours they would set in motion events that couldn't be undone, consequences that would ripple through lives and relationships for years to come. "Are we doing the right thing?" Maeve asked, voicing the question that had been haunting them both. "I don't know," Alistair replied honestly, "but I know that doing nothing would be worse. At least this way Daniel will have the truth. Whatever he does with it is his choice to make." They parted ways at the garden gate, Maeve heading back to the staff quarters to continue preparations, Alistair walking slowly toward the mansion where his son slept peacefully, dreaming of a future that would never come to pass. As he approached the house, Alistair could see into Daniel's study through the ground floor windows. His son was still awake, sitting at his desk, with wedding documents spread before him, seating charts, vendor contracts, the marriage license that would legally bind him to a woman who planned to destroy him. The sight of Daniel working so diligently on his own downfall was almost unbearable. But it also strengthened Alistair's resolve. His son deserved better than this. He deserved truth, even if it came wrapped in pain. He deserved a chance to build a real future with someone who would love him for who he was, not what he could provide. Tomorrow night, in front of everyone who mattered to him, Daniel would discover the difference between love and predation. And while the truth might break his heart in the short term, it would also set him free to find something real. As Alistair finally made his way to the small apartment above the garage, where the gatekeeper was supposed to sleep, he carried with him the weight of a father's love and the terrible responsibility of protecting a child who no longer wanted protection. Tomorrow would test everything he believed about family truth and the price of love. But tonight, for just a few more hours, he could let himself hope that love, real love, honest love, would prove stronger than deception. That his son's heart, though it would be broken, would heal. And that someday Daniel would understand that the greatest act of love is sometimes having the courage to shatter beautiful lies in service of ugly truths. The mist continued to roll in from the Pacific, wrapping the estate in a shroud of uncertainty that seemed appropriate for the vigil Alistair was about to keep. Tomorrow night, the fog would lift, and everyone would see clearly. The question was whether any of them would like what the light revealed. The grandfather clock in the mansion's foyer chimed 6 times as dawn broke over Summit Haven, its golden light streaming through the French doors of the ballroom, where tonight's rehearsal dinner would unfold. Alistair stood at his post by the repaired gates, watching as an army of vendors descended upon the estate, like soldiers preparing for battle, a battle that would determine his son's fate. The first to arrive was the catering team, led by Chef Antoine Dubois, whose Michelin-starred restaurant had been booked solid for the next 2 years, until Lila's generous offer convinced him to handle this private event. Alistair watched the chef's face as he surveyed the ballroom setup, his expression shifting from professional satisfaction to barely concealed concern. "Excuse me." Chef Dubois approached Alistair at the gates, his French accent thick with worry. "I must speak with someone in authority. There has been a terrible misunderstanding about tonight's menu." "What kind of misunderstanding?" Alistair asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The young lady, Miss Mercer, she came to my restaurant yesterday and demanded complete changes to the menu we had agreed upon. Dishes that require ingredients I cannot possibly source on such short notice. When I explained this was impossible, the chef paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. She became most unpleasant." Alistair's heart sank. Another victim of Lila's systematic cruelty. Another person whose professional reputation was being threatened by her impossible demands. What did she say exactly? She said that if I could not provide what she wanted, she would ensure that every influential family in the city knew that I was unreliable. She said she would destroy my restaurant's reputation if I did not comply. Chef Dubois' hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "I have worked 30 years to build my reputation. I cannot lose it all because of one woman's whims." The pattern was becoming clearer with each revelation. Lila didn't just treat people poorly. She weaponized her connection to the Quan family wealth to threaten anyone who couldn't immediately satisfy her demands. She was using Daniel's name and resources to terrorize people who had committed no crime beyond being unable to work miracles. "What are you going to do?" Alistair asked gently. "I will do my best with what I have, but the result will not be what she expects. And when she discovers this..." Chef Dubois shook his head helplessly. "I fear tonight will be very unpleasant for everyone." As the chef walked away, his shoulders bent with the weight of impossible expectations. Alistair felt his resolve crystallize into something harder than diamond. This wasn't just about protecting Daniel anymore. It was about protecting everyone in Lila's path of destruction. The morning brought a steady parade of similar stories. The florist arrived in tears, having worked through the night to recreate arrangements that had been perfect the first time. The musicians came with sheet music for songs they'd never played before, forced to learn new pieces, because Lila had decided the original selections were too pedestrian. The photographer's assistant bore visible bruises from where heavy equipment had fallen when Lila insisted they move their setup 3 times in as many hours. Each story painted the same picture: a woman drunk on borrowed power using her position to inflict suffering on people who couldn't fight back. But it was the conversation Alistair overheard between two security guards that chilled his blood to ice. "I'm telling you, something's not right about that woman," the first guard was saying, his voice low and urgent. "Last night, I caught her going through Mr. Daniel's study, photographing documents." "What kind of documents?" "Financial stuff. Trust fund papers, bank statements, business contracts. When she saw me, she claimed she was looking for wedding vendor contacts, but those papers had nothing to do with the wedding." Alistair's hands clenched into fists. Lila wasn't just planning to steal from Daniel after the wedding. She was already gathering intelligence, documenting assets, preparing for the systematic looting of everything his family had built. The scope of her planned betrayal was staggering. "Did you report it?" the second guard asked. "To who? She's about to be family. And Mr. Daniel thinks the sun rises and sets with her. Who's going to believe she's some kind of criminal mastermind?" The truth in those words hit Alistair like a physical blow. Even if he revealed everything he'd discovered, even if he produced video evidence and witness testimony, Daniel's love for Lila might be strong enough to rationalize it all away. Love, Alistair realized with bitter clarity, wasn't just blind, it was willfully deaf to inconvenient truths. At noon, Dr. Elizabeth Chen arrived, as planned, her medical bag in hand, and her expression carefully neutral. She'd known the Quan family for 15 years, had delivered Daniel when he was born, and had watched him grow into the principled man he'd become. If anyone could reach him with the truth, it would be her. "Alistair," Dr. Chen approached the gatehouse, her voice filled with surprise and concern. "What on earth are you doing here, and in that ridiculous disguise?" The medical training that had made her such an excellent physician also made her impossible to fool with makeup and costumes. She'd seen through his disguise immediately, just as he'd hoped she would. "It's a long story. Elizabeth and I need your help desperately," Alistair replied, abandoning all pretense. "Daniel is about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and I may be the only person who can save him." He told her everything: the deception, the evidence, the plan for tonight's revelation. Dr. Chen listened with the same focused attention she brought to medical diagnoses, her expression growing darker with each new piece of information. "My God, Alistair," she whispered when he finished. "That poor boy has no idea what's coming for him. Will you help us? Will you be here tonight to witness what happens?" "Of course. But I want you to understand something first." Dr. Chen's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades delivering difficult truths to families in crisis. "Even if we expose this woman completely, even if we save Daniel from financial ruin, we cannot save him from heartbreak. That pain is coming regardless of what we do." "I know, but I'd rather see him hurt by the truth than destroyed by lies." "Then we'd better make sure the truth is undeniable, because if there's any room for doubt, any possibility that he can rationalize her behavior, he'll choose love over logic every time." As Dr. Chen made her way to the mansion for her routine pre-wedding checkup, Alistair felt the weight of the approaching evening pressing down on his shoulders. In 6 hours, everyone who mattered to Daniel would gather in the ballroom to celebrate his impending marriage. And in the middle of that celebration, they would force Lila to reveal her true nature to the people she'd been deceiving. The afternoon brought the arrival of the wedding party, Daniel's college friends, his business associates, the extended family members who'd traveled from across the country to witness what they believed would be a joyous occasion. Alistair watched them stream through the gates, their faces bright with anticipation, and felt like a man standing on the shore watching a ship sail toward a hidden reef. Among the arrivals was someone Alistair hadn't expected to see: Margaret Quan, his sister-in-law, who'd been living in Europe for the past 5 years. Margaret had always been the family's most perceptive member, the one who could read people with laser-like accuracy. Her presence complicated everything. "Margaret!" Daniel's voice carried across the courtyard as he rushed to embrace his aunt. "I can't believe you came. I thought you were stuck in Geneva until next month." "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Margaret replied, but Alistair could hear something strained in her voice. "I've been so looking forward to meeting this remarkable woman who's captured your heart." The way she emphasized remarkable sent a chill down Alistair's spine. Margaret had done her homework. She'd probably been investigating Lila from the moment Daniel announced their engagement, using the extensive network of contacts she'd built during her years in international finance. If Margaret had discovered something... "Where is Lila?" Margaret asked, looking around the courtyard. "I was hoping to have a quiet chat with her before tonight's festivities. She's in the spa getting ready for tonight. You know how it is, bride's prerogative to be absolutely perfect." Daniel's smile was radiant with love and pride. "You're going to adore her, Margaret. She's everything I never knew I was looking for." "I'm sure she is," Margaret replied, but her eyes were already scanning the estate with the methodical precision of someone looking for threats. When her gaze fell on the gatehouse where Alistair stood, she paused for just a moment, long enough to make him wonder if she'd recognized him despite the disguise. The thought that Margaret might be here as an ally, rather than just a wedding guest, sent a flicker of hope through Alistair's chest. If she discovered evidence of Lila's deception independently, it would add crucial credibility to tonight's revelation. Margaret's word carried weight with Daniel in a way that even Alistair's might not. But it also meant the stakes were even higher. If they failed tonight, if Lila somehow managed to maintain her facade, despite everything arrayed against her, the consequences would extend far beyond Daniel's personal happiness. The entire extended family would be compromised, their resources and reputations, vulnerable to a predator who'd proven herself capable of extraordinary deception. At 4 o'clock, the final piece of their plan fell into place. Tomas arrived at the service entrance, his delivery van loaded with what appeared to be last-minute floral arrangements, but was actually the cover for his real mission. Alistair watched from the gatehouse as Tomas unloaded his cargo with the same methodical care he'd shown when helping with the broken gate, a reminder that this young man's moral courage was about to be tested in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. "Is everything ready?" Maeve appeared at Alistair's side, her estate manager facade firmly in place, but her eyes bright with nervous energy. "As ready as we can make it. Dr. Chen is positioned to observe and document everything. Margaret Quan's presence is an unexpected bonus. If anyone can reach Daniel, it's her. And Thomas knows exactly what he needs to do. And if Lila doesn't react the way we expect, then we'll have learned something important about her character, and we'll need to find another way to protect Daniel." But even as he said it, Alistair knew they wouldn't get another chance. After tonight, Lila would be legally married to Daniel, with all the rights and protections that entailed. Any evidence of her deception would have to be overwhelming enough to justify divorce proceedings, a lengthy, expensive, and emotionally devastating process that would destroy Daniel regardless of the outcome. "There's something else," Maeve said quietly, her voice heavy with reluctance. "Something I discovered this afternoon that changes everything." Alistair's blood turned to ice. "What?" "I found documentation in Lila's room, documents she thought were safely hidden. She's not just planning to steal from Daniel. She's planning to have you declared mentally incompetent." The words hit Alistair like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "She's been consulting with medical experts, building a case that your recent heart episode was actually a minor stroke that affected your judgment. She has testimony from doctors who've never examined you, psychiatric evaluations based on secondhand reports, legal opinions about competency hearings." Maeve's voice was barely a whisper. "Once she's married to Daniel, she's going to petition the courts to have you declared unfit to manage your own affairs." The implications crashed over Alistair in waves. If Lila succeeded in having him declared incompetent, Daniel would inherit control of the family fortune immediately. And as Daniel's wife, Lila would have significant influence over those decisions. She wouldn't need to wait for Alistair's natural death. She could effectively eliminate him legally, stripping away his autonomy and his ability to protect his family. How is that even possible? Money and influence. She's retained some of the most expensive medical experts and legal minds in the country, people who will testify to whatever they're paid to say. Maeve's hands were shaking with suppressed fury. She's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment of supposed intimacy with Daniel has been part of a calculated strategy to position herself for total control. Alistair felt something break inside his chest, not his heart, which had been breaking steadily for days, but something deeper and more fundamental. His faith in human nature, perhaps, or his belief that love could triumph over evil. Lila wasn't just a gold digger, or even a sophisticated con artist. She was something far worse, a predator, so calculating and ruthless that she'd planned not just to steal from her victims, but to systematically destroy their ability to resist or recover. "We can't let her get away with this," he said, his voice barely recognizable as his own. "No," Maeve agreed. "We can't. But Alistair, you need to understand what this means for tonight. If we expose her, and she realizes how much we know, she might accelerate her timeline. She could disappear with whatever assets she can grab immediately, or worse, she could trigger the competency proceedings as a defensive measure. You're saying we're trapped. I'm saying we're fighting for more than just Daniel's happiness now. We're fighting for your freedom, for the survival of everything you've built. And if we lose..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. If they lost, Alistair would spend his remaining years as a legal non-person, watching helplessly as Lila systematically looted everything he'd spent his life creating. The Quan Foundation would be dissolved, the employee benefit programs eliminated, the charitable trusts redirected to offshore accounts. Hundreds of people who depended on the family's generosity would be left with nothing. The weight of that responsibility settled on Alistair's shoulders, like a physical burden. This was no longer just about saving his son from a bad marriage. It was about protecting everyone who'd ever been touched by the Quan family's philanthropy. "Then we'd better not lose," he said finally. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the estate grounds, the final preparations for the rehearsal dinner were completed. The ballroom glowed with warm light, its crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors and gilt-framed mirrors. Round tables covered in white linen were arranged around a small dance floor, each centerpiece a masterpiece of understated elegance that the florist had somehow managed to create despite Lila's impossible demands. The scene was picture perfect, a fairy tale setting for what everyone believed would be a celebration of true love. Only 4 people in the entire gathering knew that they were actually attending a trial, one that would determine whether truth or deception would triumph in the end. At 7 o'clock sharp, the guests began to arrive. Daniel stood at the ballroom's entrance in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, his face radiant with happiness as he greeted each arrival. Beside him, Lila looked absolutely stunning in a flowing emerald dress that complemented her eyes and highlighted the beauty that had first captured Daniel's attention. They made a perfect couple, the kind that graced magazine covers and inspired romantic novels. But Alistair, watching from his position outside the French doors, could see what others missed: the calculating gleam in Lila's eyes as she assessed each guest, cataloging their wealth and influence, filing away information that might prove useful in her future schemes. Even now, even at what should have been the happiest moment of her fraudulent relationship, she was working, planning, preparing for the next phase of her con. Dr. Chen entered early, her presence unremarkable among the other family friends. She positioned herself near the bar, where she could observe everything, while appearing to simply enjoy the evening's festivities. Margaret Quan arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance that drew everyone's attention, and allowing her to study the room's dynamics with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades navigating high-stakes social situations. And somewhere in the service areas of the mansion, Thomas Rivas was putting on a delivery company uniform and preparing to walk into the most dangerous situation of his young life. At 8:30, just as the dinner service was beginning, Tomas appeared at the ballroom's service entrance. He carried a small package and wore the neutral expression of someone simply doing his job, but Alistair could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly as he approached the maitre d'. "Delivery for Mr. Daniel Quan." Tomas announced, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. The sender said it was urgent, something about the wedding ceremony tomorrow. The maitre d' looked confused. "I wasn't told to expect any deliveries tonight. Perhaps you could leave it with..." "I'm sorry, but I was specifically instructed to deliver this personally to Mr. Quan." The sender was very clear about that. Tomas's performance was perfect, polite, but insistent, professional, but slightly apologetic. From her position near the head table, Lila's head snapped toward the service entrance like a predator sensing danger. Even from across the room, Alistair could see her face pale as she recognized the young delivery driver who'd witnessed her phone conversation the day before. "Is there a problem?" Daniel asked, noticing the commotion and moving toward the service entrance with the natural grace of a host concerned about his guests' comfort. "No problem at all, sir," Tomas replied, extending the package toward Daniel. "Just a delivery that apparently couldn't wait until tomorrow. The sender said you'd understand the urgency once you saw it." Daniel accepted the package with curious confusion, but before he could examine it properly, Lila appeared at his side with the speed of someone in full panic mode. "Darling, what's all this fuss about?" she asked, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness, even as her eyes bored into Tomas with unmistakable hostility. "Surely, whatever it is can wait until after our dinner." "It'll just take a moment," Daniel replied, starting to unwrap the package. "I'm curious about what's so urgent." Inside the package was a USB drive labeled, "For your consideration," in neat handwriting. But more importantly, there was a note that made Daniel's face go white as he read it. "Mr. Quan, I witnessed something yesterday that I believe you need to know about before your wedding. The contents of this drive will explain everything. I'm sorry to intrude on your celebration, but my conscience won't let me stay silent when a good man is about to be hurt. Please watch this when you're alone, and then decide for yourself what it means. A friend who cares about justice." The color drained from Lila's face as she read the note over Daniel's shoulder. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. It was only a flash gone almost before it registered, but several people in the immediate vicinity caught a glimpse of something that made them step back instinctively. "What nonsense!" Lila said, her voice sharp with barely controlled panic. "Daniel, darling, this is obviously some kind of prank or scam. You can't seriously be considering..." "Actually, I think I should look at this," Daniel replied, his natural curiosity overriding her objections. "If someone felt strongly enough to interrupt our rehearsal dinner, it must be important. But the guests, the dinner. You can't just abandon everyone for some random delivery from a stranger." The shrillness creeping into Lila's voice was attracting attention from nearby tables. Conversations were beginning to pause as people turned to see what was causing the disturbance near the head table. "It'll only take a few minutes," Daniel said reasonably. "I'll just step into the study and..." "No!" The word exploded from Lila with such force that half the ballroom fell silent. Realizing her mistake, she immediately tried to soften her tone. "I mean, surely, Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow. This is our special night, Daniel. Don't let some stranger ruin it for us." But Daniel was looking at her now, with the first flicker of genuine confusion he'd shown all evening. "Lila, why are you so upset about this? It's just a delivery." "I'm not upset," she replied, her voice climbing toward hysteria despite her efforts to control it. "I just think it's incredibly rude for someone to interrupt our private celebration with whatever petty grievance they have. Can't you see this is probably just someone trying to cause trouble?" Margaret Quan had moved closer to the developing scene, her experienced eyes taking in every nuance of Lila's deteriorating composure. Dr. Chen was also positioning herself to observe her medical training, helping her recognize the signs of someone in full psychological crisis. "You know what?" Daniel said, his voice carrying a note of determination that surprised everyone, including himself. "I think I will take a look at this, just to satisfy my curiosity." "Daniel, please." Lila reached for the USB drive, but Daniel pulled it away from her grasping fingers. "Lila, what's wrong with you? Why are you so afraid of me looking at whatever this is?" The question hung in the air like a sword, sharp and impossible to ignore. Every person within earshot was now openly staring at the couple watching, as Lila's perfect facade finally began to crack under the pressure of her own panic. "I'm not afraid," she said, but her voice was shaking now, her hands trembling as she reached for Daniel's arm. "I just don't want our special night ruined by some vindictive person with an agenda. Then there should be nothing on here that concerns you," Daniel replied, his tone becoming cooler with each exchange. "If you're not afraid, why are you trying so hard to stop me from looking?" It was the perfect trap, and Lila had walked into it with her eyes wide open. Any reasonable response would have been to encourage Daniel to examine the drive to demonstrate confidence in their relationship by showing she had nothing to hide. But panic had short-circuited her usual cunning, leaving her exposed and desperate. "Fine," she snapped, her composure finally shattering completely. "Look at whatever garbage that person has given you. But don't come crying to me when it turns out to be lies and manipulation designed to destroy our happiness." The words were meant to sound confident, but they came out as the desperate threat of someone who knew their world was about to collapse. And in that moment, as 60 pairs of eyes watched Lila Mercer reveal the ugliness that had always lurked beneath her beautiful surface, Alistair knew that the truth had finally won. Daniel looked at his fiancée, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since they'd met. And what he saw in her face, what everyone in the ballroom saw, was not the woman they'd believed her to be, but something far darker and more dangerous. "I think," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence of the ballroom, "we need to have a very serious conversation." The silence in the ballroom stretched like a taut wire, 60 guests frozen in tableau, as Daniel clutched the USB drive and stared at the woman he'd planned to marry in less than 24 hours. Lila's face had gone ashen, her emerald dress suddenly looking like expensive armor that could no longer protect her from the truth bearing down like an avalanche. "Daniel, please," she whispered, reaching for his hand with fingers that shook like autumn leaves. "Don't let some stranger destroy what we have. You know me. You love me." But Daniel was already stepping back, the USB drive, held like evidence in a trial that was just beginning. "Do I know you, Lila? Because the woman I love wouldn't be this terrified of the truth." Margaret Quan moved closer, her diplomat's instincts recognizing a moment of historical significance. Dr. Chen positioned herself where she could observe every micro-expression, every tell that would later matter in whatever legal proceedings might follow. And from his vantage point outside the French doors, Alistair felt his heart hammering against his ribs as his son walked toward a computer terminal at the far end of the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel announced, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "I apologize for this interruption, but something has come to my attention that requires immediate clarification." The projection screen that had been set up for wedding photos flickered to life as Daniel inserted the USB drive. What appeared first was Tomas's dashboard camera footage from that morning. Crystal clear video showing Lila deliberately splashing coffee at the elderly gatekeeper. Her face twisted with contempt as she watched him struggle with his injuries. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Several women covered their mouths in shock, while men shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. This wasn't the elegant, compassionate woman they'd been introduced to. This was someone else entirely. "That's not," Lila started, but her voice cracked like ice under pressure. "That's taken out of context. I was stressed about wedding preparations and..." "Context." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through her excuses like a blade. What context makes it acceptable to abuse an elderly employee? The second video began playing security footage from inside the mansion, showing Lila berating Maria Santos, until the housekeeper was in tears, then transforming into loving fiancé the moment Daniel appeared in the doorway. The speed and completeness of her personality switch was so stark that several guests actually recoiled from the screen. "Daniel, you have to understand." Lila's voice was climbing toward hysteria, now all pretense of control abandoned. "The stress of planning our wedding, trying to be perfect for your family." "Our family." Margaret Quan's voice cut through the ballroom like steel through silk. "Is that what you call us?" She pulled out her own phone, scrolling to a document she'd been saving for exactly this moment. "Because according to the private investigator I hired 3 months ago, you call us something quite different." The blood drained from Lila's face so completely that she swayed on her feet. "Margaret, I don't know what lies someone has told you." "The Orion Group is a piggy bank." Margaret read from her phone, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "Daniel is too trusting for his own good. The old man's health isn't great anyway when he dies. I'll be right there to help Daniel manage his inheritance." Margaret looked up from the screen, her eyes blazing with fury. "Those are your words, Lila, recorded during a phone conversation with your mother last Tuesday." The sound that emerged from Lila's throat wasn't quite human. A keening wail of a trapped animal realizing the cage door had finally closed. Around the ballroom, guests were rising from their seats, some moving toward the exits, others pressing closer to witness the complete destruction of what they believed to be a love story. "That's illegal!" Lila shrieked, her composure completely shattered now. "You can't record private conversations. This is entrapment. Actually..." Dr. Chen spoke for the first time, her medical training lending authority to her words. "In California, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation, and Margaret wasn't the one doing the recording." The implication hit the room like thunder. Someone else had been gathering evidence, someone with access to Lila's private conversations. Eyes began turning toward the French doors, where Alistair stood in his gatekeeper's disguise, and slowly understanding began to dawn. "You..." Lila whispered, her gaze fixing on Alistair with the intensity of a laser. "You're not really..." Her voice caught as the pieces fell into place. "Oh my God, You're him. You're Alistair Quan." The confession hung in the air like an explosion's echo. Daniel's head snapped toward the figure in the gatekeeper's uniform, his eyes widening with recognition and confusion, and something that might have been betrayal. "Dad." Daniel's voice broke on the word, carrying 20 years of trust and love and the crushing weight of realization. "What have you done?" Alistair stepped through the French doors, pulling off the baseball cap and latex mask with hands that had aged a decade in 3 days. "I saved your life, son, even if you hate me for it." The transformation was startling, from elderly gatekeeper to billionaire patriarch in the span of seconds. Guests who had never seen Alistair Quan in person gasped at the reveal, while those who knew him stared in shock at the elaborate deception he'd maintained. You had no right, Daniel said, his voice hollow with shock and pain. You had no right to spy on me, to manipulate my life, to protect you from a woman who planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal everything we've built. Alistair's voice carried the weight of a father's desperate love. A woman who was going to loot our charitable foundations, destroy the employee benefit programs, and leave hundreds of families with nothing. The revelations kept coming like hammer blows. Maeve appeared from the service entrance carrying boxes of documents, legal papers, financial records, medical consultations about competency proceedings. The scope of Lila's planned betrayal spread across the ballroom like spilled wine, staining everything it touched. She has offshore accounts already established, Maeve announced, her Irish accent thick with emotion. Lawyers retained in 3 countries with no extradition treaties. Exit strategies planned down to the hour. Stop! Lila screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Stop this character assassination. I love Daniel. Everything I did was for us, for our future together. What future? Tomas stepped forward from the crowd, his young face set with determination. The future where you replace all the staff with younger, cheaper help who understand their place. I heard that conversation too. The net was closing around Lila from every direction. Each witness, each piece of evidence, each recorded conversation added another layer to the case against her. But it was Daniel's face that broke Alistair's heart, the slow, terrible progression from confusion to understanding to crushing betrayal. The prenup, Daniel whispered, understanding flooding his features. You convinced me to waive the prenup because you said it showed I didn't trust you. I do love you, Lila said, but her voice was hollow now, the fight draining out of her as she realized the scope of what had been uncovered. Maybe it started as something else, but I really do love you. Love. Love. Margaret's voice was ice cold with contempt. You mean like when you told your mother that being faithful to Daniel wouldn't be hard work, because he'd be too busy running the company to notice your affairs? Each revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. His hands were shaking now, the USB drive falling forgotten to the marble floor as he stared at the woman he'd planned to spend his life with. None of this matters. Lila suddenly rallied, her voice taking on a desperate, cunning edge. You can't prove intent. You can't prove I would have actually gone through with any of this. It's all speculation, and actually we can prove it. Dr. Chen pulled out her own phone, displaying a recording app that had been running throughout the evening. Because you just admitted to planning to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit grand theft in front of 60 witnesses. The trap had closed completely. Leela looked around the ballroom, seeing nothing but hostile faces and damning evidence wherever her gaze fell. The beautiful mask she'd worn for months had been torn away completely, leaving only the predator beneath. I want to see her removed from the property immediately, Daniel said, his voice steady, despite the tears streaming down his face. And I want a restraining order filed first thing tomorrow morning. Daniel, please. Lila made one last desperate attempt, reaching for him with hands that had once brought him comfort and now made him recoil. You're making a mistake. You're throwing away our love because of lies and manipulation. The only lies here came from you, Daniel replied, stepping back from her reach. And the manipulation, my God, Lila. How long have you been planning this? How many times did you lie to my face? How many times did you pretend to love me while planning to destroy everything I care about? The security team had arrived, flanking Lila with professional courtesy but unmistakable authority. She looked around the ballroom one final time, her beautiful features twisted with rage and defeat. You'll regret this, she said, her voice carrying the venom of someone with nothing left to lose. All of you. I could have made Daniel happy. I could have been everything he needed. No, Alistair said quietly, approaching his son for the first time without his disguise. You could have been everything he thought he needed. But what he actually needs is someone who sees his staff as human beings, who treats people with kindness, regardless of their station, who values character over comfort. As Lila was escorted from the ballroom, her threats and protests echoing down the marble corridors, an eerie silence settled over the remaining guests. 60 people sat in stunned contemplation of what they'd just witnessed, not just the exposure of a con artist, but the systematic dismantling of what they'd believed to be true love. Daniel stood alone in the center of the ballroom, still in his perfect tuxedo, looking like a man who'd just survived a car crash and wasn't sure whether to be grateful or devastated. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "How long have you known?" he asked, not looking at his father. "I suspected something was wrong a few months ago," Alistair replied honestly. "But I didn't know the extent of it until this week. The disguise, the deception I needed to see who she really was when she thought no one important was watching. And what you saw was a monster. What I saw was a woman who treated good people with cruelty because she could, who planned to destroy not just you, but everyone who depends on our family's generosity." Alistair moved closer to his son, his heart breaking at the pain in Daniel's eyes. "I saw someone who would have taken everything beautiful about your character and used it as a weapon against you." Dr. Chen approached them both, her medical bag in hand, and her expression gentle with professional compassion. "Daniel, you need to sit down. You're in shock, and you need to process what's happened before you make any decisions about what comes next." "What comes next?" Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "My wedding is tomorrow. I've invited 300 people to watch me marry a woman who planned to have my father declared insane so she could steal our money." "What comes next," Margaret said firmly, moving to her nephew's side, "is that you take time to heal. You grieve for what you thought you had. You learn from what actually happened, and you move forward with the wisdom that comes from surviving something terrible." "The guests," Daniel said, suddenly, looking around at the shocked faces still filling the ballroom. "The vendors, the caterer, the flowers, everything's already been paid for." "So we celebrate anyway," Alistair said, surprising everyone, including himself. "We celebrate the fact that you discovered the truth before it was too late. We celebrate the fact that good people were willing to risk themselves to protect someone they barely knew. We celebrate the fact that love, real love, is strong enough to survive even this." Tomas stepped forward from the crowd, his young face earnest with emotion. "If it helps, sir, I'd be honored to stay for whatever celebration you want to have. After what I've seen tonight, I think we could all use a reminder that there are still good people in the world." One by one, the other guests began to voice their agreement. The chef emerged from the kitchen to announce that dinner would still be served, not as a rehearsal for a wedding that would never happen, but as a gathering of people who'd witnessed truth triumph over deception. The musicians began playing again, not wedding songs, but melodies of hope and renewal. Maria Santos appeared at Daniel's side, her face bright with tears of relief. "Mr. Daniel, I just want you to know, we all love you, all of us who work here. We've been so worried, but we didn't know how to tell you what we were seeing." "I should have known," Daniel replied, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "I should have seen the signs." "Love makes us blind to the things we don't want to see," Dr. Chen said gently. "That's not a character flaw. It's human nature. The fact that you're capable of that kind of trust, that kind of faith in another person, is what makes you who you are." As the evening progressed, the ballroom gradually transformed from a crime scene into something else entirely, a celebration of truth, of family, of the kind of love that protects rather than destroys. Daniel slowly began to rejoin the conversation, his natural warmth reasserting itself as he talked with guests who'd traveled from around the world to support him. But it was the quiet conversation between father and son that everyone was waiting for. Finally, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Daniel and Alistair found themselves alone on the mansion's terrace, looking out over the Pacific under a canopy of stars. "I'm sorry," Daniel said finally, his voice barely audible over the sound of waves against the cliffs. "I should have listened to your concerns. I should have been more careful." "You have nothing to apologize for," Alistair replied firmly. "You loved someone with your whole heart. That's never something to be sorry for, even when it turns out the person didn't deserve it." "But I put everyone at risk. The staff, the family, the foundations, if you hadn't intervened." "But I did intervene, and so did Maeve and Tomas and Margaret and Dr. Chen. That's what families do. We protect each other even when it's hard, even when it hurts." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the magnitude of what had been averted. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "What happens now? With the wedding tomorrow, with all the guests who've already arrived. Now we send everyone home with a story they'll tell for the rest of their lives." Alistair smiled sadly. About the time they witnessed love save itself from its own generosity. "And Lila? The authorities will handle Lila. Margaret has enough evidence to ensure she faces consequences for what she planned, even if she didn't complete it. But that's not your concern anymore. Will I ever trust anyone again?" Daniel asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in his heart all evening. "You will," Alistair said with the certainty of someone who'd lived long enough to know that hearts heal. "But next time, you'll trust more wisely. You'll look for someone who treats the gatekeeper the same way they treat the owner of the estate." As if summoned by the conversation, Maeve appeared on the terrace carrying a tray with hot tea and something that looked suspiciously like his mother's shortbread recipe. "Thought you two might need some comfort food," she said, setting down the tray with maternal efficiency. "It's been quite an evening." "Maeve," Daniel said, accepting a cup of tea with hands that were finally steady again. "Thank you for everything, for protecting all of us." "That's what we do here," she replied simply. "We take care of each other. It's what makes this place a family instead of just a business." 3 months later, Daniel stood at the same gates where his father had first disguised himself as a gatekeeper. But this time, he wasn't arriving for a wedding rehearsal. He was greeting the first participants in the Quan Family Respect Initiative, a program that provided education scholarships and job training for service industry workers. Tomas Rivas had been the program's first beneficiary, using his scholarship to attend business school while continuing to work as the estate's head of transportation services. His courage in speaking truth to power had earned him not just respect, but opportunity. The gatekeeper position had been filled by a retired teacher named Robert Chen, Dr. Chen's father, who brought dignity and wisdom to the role while ensuring that everyone who entered Summit Haven was treated with the kindness they deserved. "Mr. Daniel," Robert called out as a familiar car approached the gates. "Your guest has arrived." The car that pulled through the gates carried someone Daniel had met at a charity event the month before, Amara Sethi, a human rights lawyer, who'd spent the morning volunteering at the local food bank before agreeing to have lunch at Summit Haven. When her car had gotten a flat tire on the coastal highway, she'd insisted on helping the elderly driver change it herself, rather than calling for roadside assistance. It was a small thing, but Daniel had learned to pay attention to small things. "Thank you, Robert," Daniel said, approaching the car as Amara stepped out. She wore simple jeans and a volunteer t-shirt that bore the stains of honest work, and she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with designer clothes or perfect makeup. "Sorry I'm late," Amara said, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "We had a last-minute crisis at the food bank, and I couldn't leave until it was resolved. That's exactly why I wanted to have lunch with you, Daniel replied, offering his arm as they walked toward the mansion. Anyone who puts service above schedule is exactly the kind of person I want to know better. As they approached the front door, Alistair emerged from the garden, where he'd been working alongside the groundskeeping staff, a weekly tradition he'd maintained since the night of the rehearsal dinner. His hands were dirty with honest soil. His hair was unkempt from the morning's labor, and his face bore the deep satisfaction of someone who'd remembered what really mattered. "Amara," Daniel said warmly, "I'd like you to meet my father, Alistair Quan." Amara stepped forward with genuine warmth, extending her hand without hesitation, despite his work clothes. "Mr. Quan, it's an honor to meet you. Daniel's told me so much about the Foundation's work." "Please call me Alistair," he replied, accepting her handshake with hands that bore the calluses of real work. "And the honor is mine. Daniel tells me you've been advocating for immigrant families who've been exploited by their employers." "It's necessary work," Amara said simply. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their circumstances." Father and son exchanged a glance, a moment of perfect understanding that some lessons were worth any amount of pain to learn. Daniel had found someone who saw people rather than status, who chose service over comfort, who understood that character was revealed not in grand gestures, but in small kindnesses to those who couldn't offer anything in return. 6 months later, Daniel proposed to Amara on the same terrace, where he'd learned the difference between love and manipulation. But instead of a dramatic gesture with photographers and elaborate settings, he simply asked her to marry him while they were working together to plant a memorial garden for employees who'd served the Quan family faithfully over the years. Her answer was yes, but only after she'd helped him finish planting the last rosebush. The wedding, when it came, was everything the first one would never have been: genuine, warm, focused on family rather than status. The ceremony was held in the estate's gardens, with Robert Chen serving as one of the ushers, and Tomas Rivas capturing the day's memories as the official photographer, a skill he developed during his business school studies. But the moment everyone would remember came during the reception, when Amara surprised everyone by asking Maria Santos to stand with her during the traditional bouquet toss. When confused guests asked why, Amara's answer was simple: because Maria has been taking care of this family for years, and it's time someone took care of her. The bouquet, when thrown, somehow found its way into Maria's hands, and within a year she'd married the head gardener in a ceremony that Alistair himself officiated. As the seasons turned and years passed, Summit Haven became known not just as the home of a wealthy family, but as a place where people mattered more than profits, where kindness was valued above status, where the gates stood open to anyone who approached with respect and good intentions. Daniel and Amara raised their children to understand that privilege was responsibility, that wealth was stewardship, that the measure of a person's worth was found in how they treated those who couldn't help them in return. And sometimes on quiet evenings, when the Pacific mist rolled in from the ocean, Alistair would walk to the gates where he'd once stood in disguise, testing the character of a woman who'd planned to destroy everything he loved. He'd think about the courage of a young delivery driver who'd chosen truth over safety, about the loyalty of an estate manager who'd risked everything to protect her family, about the love of a son who'd learned to see with clearer eyes. The gates themselves had been restored to perfect condition, their iron hinges strong enough to last another century. But they stood as more than just an entrance to an estate. They were a reminder that the most important choices in life often come disguised as small moments, that character is revealed not in grand gestures, but in how we treat the gatekeeper at the door. Love, Alistair had learned, wasn't just about opening your heart to another person. It was about having the courage to protect that heart from those who would exploit its generosity, and the wisdom to recognize the difference between devotion and predation. As he stood at those gates in the gathering twilight, watching his son and daughter-in-law work side by side in the memorial garden they'd planted together. Alistair knew that sometimes the greatest act of love was having the strength to shatter beautiful lies in service of difficult truths. The mist rolled in from the Pacific, wrapping the estate in gentle embrace, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of genuine laughter echoed across grounds where love had finally learned to see clearly.